Imagine being handed 10 ugly stones and being told that one of them could be the beginning of a fine gemstone. You are allowed to choose only once. No polishing, no cutting, no laboratory, just your eyes. Which one do you keep? That is the uncomfortable reality of rough gemstones. The stone that looks best can disappoint you, while the one you nearly throw away may be the one hiding the strongest color, the cleanest crystal, or the most valuable section. And nature makes the game even harder. A black-looking crystal can turn red when light reaches its edge. A dirty river pebble can hide blue sapphire beneath a weathered skin. A brown piece of ironstone can contain a line of opals so thin that one careless pass of a cutting wheel can erase it forever. So this is not really a countdown of beautiful stones. It is a test of whether appearances can be trusted. Because with each piece of rough, we are going to make the same decision a collector or cutter has to make. Would you walk past it, or would you look again? Here are 10 rough stones that deserve a second look. Starting with a dark volcanic rock hiding something unexpectedly green. Number 10, Peridot, the green gem hidden inside volcanic rock. At first glance, the rock looks like something most people would never bother picking up. Its surface is dark, coarse, sometimes almost black, the kind of volcanic stone that can disappear among thousands of others scattered across an old lava field. There is no polished shine, no obvious crystal face, and certainly nothing that resembles the bright green peridot seen in jewelry. But sometimes, a broken edge tells a different story. Inside the dark rock, small areas of green begin to appear. They may look like scattered grains at first, yellow-green against the darker material around them. In better specimens, those grains become clearer, more transparent, and more distinctly crystalline. What seemed like an ordinary piece of volcanic rock suddenly reveals material that formed far deeper beneath the surface than the rock itself suggests. Peridot is the gem-quality variety of olivine, a mineral strongly associated with Earth's upper mantle. Much of the material brought close enough to the surface for us to find has traveled upward through volcanic processes. In some places, eruptions carried fragments of mantle rock with them, preserving green olivine crystals inside darker host material. What appears to be a simple volcanic stone can therefore contain a physical remnant of a part of Earth that humans cannot directly reach. That is what makes this rough material more interesting than its appearance alone. The green crystal is not merely hidden by dirt, it is hidden by geological history. And even after olivine is exposed, there is another question. Is any of it actually good enough to become a gemstone? Many crystals are too small, fractured, cloudy, or included to produce attractive cut peridot. A bright patch of green is therefore only the beginning of the evaluation. The stone has to be examined for transparency, usable size, fractures, and the depth of its color. That uncertainty is exactly why the rough deserves attention. A finished peridot tells you what survived the cutting process. The dark volcanic rock tells you something more compelling, where the search began. Sometimes all it takes is one fresh break in an otherwise forgettable stone to reveal that the material inside has traveled an extraordinary distance, from deep within the earth to the surface, and eventually, perhaps, into the hands of a cutter who recognizes what everyone else might have overlooked. Number 9, Garnet, the dark crystal that reveals its color in light. A rough garnet can sit in your hand and give away almost nothing. No bright red glow, no polished brilliance. Sometimes not even a hint of the color people associate with the stone. In thick, rough garnet may appear brown, black, or almost lifeless, especially when its surface is weathered or still attached to the rock in which it formed. That is exactly why experienced collectors often look past color first. They look at the shape. Garnet commonly grows in naturally geometric crystals, and even after weathering, those forms can survive as a clue. A dark lump embedded in schist may reveal flat faces, unusual symmetry, or a rounded, many-sided crystal shape that does not resemble the broken fragments around it. To an untrained eye, it may still look ordinary. To someone who knows minerals, that geometry is an invitation to look closer. Then comes the test that can completely change the impression of the stone. Light. When strong light is directed through a thinner edge, A crystal that looked almost black can suddenly show deep red, orange red, or sometimes a completely different color than expected. The stone was never truly black. It was simply too thick, too rough, and too light-absorbing to reveal what was inside. That moment matters because garnet is not one single red gem. It is a family of related minerals. Some varieties produce the familiar wine red tones, but others can appear vivid orange, intense green, purple, or even change color under different lighting. Still, seeing color does not mean the rough will become a fine gemstone. A cutter has to judge what the eye cannot fully see. How deep does the transparent zone continue? Are there internal fractures? Is the center clean enough to facet, or is only the outer edge attractive? A crystal can look promising from one angle and disappointing from another. That uncertainty is what gives rough garnet its quiet tension. You are not looking at the finished gemstone. You are looking at evidence of what might be there. And sometimes a rough crystal that seems too dark to deserve attention contains a narrow window of color, bright enough to justify everything that comes next. Garnet teaches a simple lesson. The most important part of a rough stone is not always what it shows immediately. Sometimes it is what the stone is still hiding. Number 8. Aquamarine. The pale crystal hiding in pegmatite. Aquamarine can hide in a way that is almost unfair. Not because it is buried beneath a dark crust, and not because its crystal is impossible to recognize, but because at first glance it may look far too pale to be important. Inside a coarse pegmatite surrounded by quartz, feldspar, and sheets of mica, a rough aquamarine crystal can blend almost perfectly into its surroundings. Its surface may be dull. Clay and mineral coatings can soften its color, and instead of the clean blue people expect from a finished gemstone, the rough may show only the faintest suggestion of blue-green. That is where an experienced eye stops judging the stone by color alone. Aquamarine is the blue to blue-green variety of beryl, and beryl often forms elongated six-sided crystals. Even when the color is weak, the geometry can remain. Straight parallel sides, a hexagonal cross-section, or a crystal disappearing deeper into the host rock can become the first real clue that this is not just another pale mineral in the matrix. Then the stone begins to tell a more complicated story. A large crystal does not automatically mean a large gemstone. Some aquamarine rough is crossed by fractures. Some contains cloudy zones, mineral inclusions, or sections with color too weak to be attractive after cutting. A crystal that looks impressive from the outside may hold only one clean area worth saving. That is why cutters often study the rough from several directions before committing to a cut. They are trying to see past the surface and imagine the gemstone inside. A fracture visible from one side may turn out to pass directly through the best colored section. A pale area near the surface may become richer farther into the crystal, or the opposite may happen. The promising blue seen from one angle may disappear as soon as the stone is open. That uncertainty is what makes aquamarine rough so compelling. The stone does not always reveal itself with drama. Sometimes the most important clue is simply that its shape feels too deliberate, its transparency too unusual, or its faint blue tone just strong enough to deserve another look. And once the right section is finally exposed, the transformation can be remarkable. What looked like a nearly colorless crystal trapped in ordinary rock can become a clear blue gemstone that seems completely disconnected from the rough material it came from. Aquamarine does not always demand attention. Sometimes it rewards the person patient enough to notice what everyone else nearly missed. Number 7. Ruby, the red crystal trapped inside marble. Sometimes a gemstone does not hide by looking ordinary. It hides by revealing only enough to make you wonder what is still buried. A piece of pale marble may look almost featureless until a small patch of red breaks through the surface. At first, it may be no more than a corner of crystal, a narrow red edge, or a dull crimson shape disappearing into white rock. It does not yet look like the transparent ruby people imagine in fine jewelry, but that tiny exposure can be enough to stop someone in their tracks. Ruby is the red variety of corundum, and in several important deposits, ruby crystals form within marble. This contrast can be striking. pale host rock surrounding a red crystal that may continue far deeper than the visible surface suggests. And that is where the uncertainty begins. The exposed color might be only the tip of something extraordinary, or it might be the best part of the entire crystal. A ruby can continue into the marble and become more transparent. It can also become cloudy, fractured, or opaque only millimeters below the surface. What appears promising from the outside does not guarantee what will be found inside. For a cutter, every decision becomes a risk. Remove more of the surrounding marble, and a larger crystal may emerge. But the newly exposed section might reveal fractures that make faceting impossible. Cut too aggressively, and valuable material can be lost before its internal structure is fully understood. That is why rough ruby is not evaluated only by how red it looks. The real questions are deeper. Does light pass through the crystal? How evenly is the color distributed? Where do the fractures travel? Is there a clean section large enough to become a faceted gem? Or would the material be better suited to a cabochon? Sometimes the most beautiful result is not even a loose gemstone. A ruby crystal still held naturally in white marble can preserve the geological relationship that created it, turning the specimen itself into something worth keeping. And that is what makes rough ruby so compelling. The red color may catch your eye first, but the real mystery lies in what you cannot see. One exposed corner can suggest an entire gemstone hidden in the rock. But until the matrix is carefully removed, no one knows whether the stone is concealing a treasure or simply the possibility of one. Number 6. Emerald, the green crystal hidden in dark matrix. Emerald rough can create one of the most dramatic contrasts in the gemstone world. A dark, uneven piece of rock may look almost lifeless at first. Then somewhere across the surface, a streak of green appears. Sometimes it is only a narrow edge. Sometimes a crystal face breaks through the matrix. And sometimes all you see is a small patch of color surrounded by black mica, schist, quartz, or other minerals. That single patch can completely change how the stone is viewed. Emerald is the green variety of beryl, but unlike aquamarine, it is often far more complicated internally. The crystal may contain fractures, mineral inclusions, cloudy zones, and uneven transparency. What looks promising from the surface can become difficult the moment someone tries to understand what is actually hidden inside. And that is where rough emerald becomes less about beauty and more about judgment. A cutter is not simply asking whether the stone is green enough. They are trying to understand how much usable gemstone exists within the crystal. A strong green area may extend deeper into the rough, or it may fade almost immediately. A visible fracture may stop near the surface, or it may run directly through the center. Even when the color is exceptional, the internal structure can determine whether the stone becomes a faceted emerald, a cabochon, a smaller gem than expected, or remains a mineral specimen. Sometimes a small window is polished into the rough just to see inside. That tiny opening can reveal information the natural surface hides. Transparency, color distribution, fractures, and the direction in which the crystal may be worth cutting. And every decision comes with a cost. The more material removed, the smaller the final gemstone becomes. But keeping too much rough can preserve flaws that weaken the finished stone or dull its appearance. That tension is what makes emerald rough so fascinating. A large crystal may hold only one exceptional section. A smaller crystal may be surprisingly clean. And a rough piece that looks unattractive from one side may reveal its best color from another. The finished emerald may eventually look controlled, symmetrical, and refined. The rough tells a very different story. It shows how much uncertainty existed before the beauty became obvious. And sometimes all it takes is one strip of green cutting through dark rock to suggest that something far more valuable may still be waiting underneath. Number 5. Sapphire, the river-worn pebble that hides its blue. Sapphire can be deceptive for a reason that has nothing to do with rarity. Sometimes nature simply removes the features that would have made it easy to recognize. A crystal can begin its life with sharp edges and a clear geometric form, then spend years being carried through gravel, sand, and moving water. By the time it reaches a riverbed, much of that original shape may be gone. What remains can look less like a gemstone and more like an ordinary pebble. Rounded, frosted, gray-blue, sometimes almost dull, and that is exactly why rough sapphire can be missed. Sapphire is a variety of corundum, one of the hardest natural minerals on Earth. That hardness allows it to survive weathering and transport better than many of the rocks around it. Over time, softer material breaks down, while dense corundum can remain behind and become concentrated in alluvial gravels. But survival comes at a visual cost. The surface may be worn enough to hide the color inside. A stone that looks dark gray in dry conditions can behave very differently when wet. Water reduces some of the scattering from the rough surface, allowing more light to enter the stone. Suddenly, a muted pebble may reveal a deeper blue, visible zoning, or a more transparent interior. That moment can be enough to justify a closer examination. But sapphire rough carries another uncertainty. The color you see on the outside may not tell you what a finished stone will look like. Some rough is too dark. Some contains bands of color rather than an even distribution. Some has fractures or inclusions positioned exactly where a cutter would prefer clean material. A blue edge can be promising, but it does not guarantee that the center will be equally strong. This is where experience becomes important. A cutter has to imagine the gemstone before it exists. Which direction should the stone face? Where is the richest color? How much material must be removed to reach the cleanest section? And will that beautiful patch of blue still be there after the first cut? That uncertainty is what makes rough sapphire so compelling. A river-worn pebble may have lost the crystal shape that once identified it, but it can still keep one secret: its color. And sometimes all it takes is water, light, and a second look to bring that hidden blue back to life. Number 4, Tanzanite, the brownish crystal that hides a blue-violet gem. Tanzanite is one of the clearest examples of how misleading rough gemstone material can be. Most people know Tanzanite by its finished color: blue, violet, sometimes shifting between the two as the stone moves in the light. That appearance is so strongly associated with the gem that seeing the rough for the first time can be almost confusing, because some natural Tanzanite does not begin blue at all. Freshly mined crystals can show brownish, yellowish, greenish, or mixed tones before heating and cutting reveal the blue-violet appearance buyers recognize today. To someone who only knows the finished gemstone, that rough material may look unremarkable, even disappointing. But the real complexity goes deeper than color. Tanzanite is a variety of zoisite with strong pleochroism, meaning the crystal can show different colors when viewed from different directions. One angle may appear more blue, another may lean violet. A different direction can look much less attractive. That means a cutter is not simply trying to make the rough smaller and shinier. They are making a choice about which color the final gemstone will emphasize, and that decision can cost weight. The orientation that produces the richest blue may require cutting away more material. A direction that preserves more carats may produce a stone with stronger violet tones instead. There is often a trade-off between size, color, and clarity, and once the first major cut is made, there is no way to put that material back. The rough itself can add another layer of risk. Zoisite has cleavage, so a crystal that looks solid can still be vulnerable along certain internal directions. Fractures, inclusions, and stress from mining can further complicate the process. A careless decision can turn promising rough into several much smaller pieces. That is why Tanzanite deserves more than a quick glance. Its most famous quality may not be visible at first. The crystal has to be understood before it can be transformed. A brownish piece of rough may eventually become an intense blue-violet gem, but only if someone recognizes the potential hidden in its orientation, color behavior, and internal structure. With Tanzanite, the gemstone is not simply concealed beneath a rough surface. In a very real sense, it is concealed inside a decision. Number 3, Tourmaline, the crystal that can hide more than one color. Tourmaline can be deceptive in a completely different way. Sometimes the rough does not hide a single color, it hides several. A crystal may emerge from a pegmatite looking dark, fractured, or partially buried in quartz and feldspar. One end might appear green, another may look almost black. The surface may be scratched, coated, or broken in a way that makes the interior difficult to judge. But once light begins to pass through the crystal, the story can change. Green may fade into pink. Pink may pass through a nearly colorless zone. A darker exterior may surround a much brighter center. And sometimes the most interesting color is not visible until part of the crystal has been removed. That is one reason tourmaline rough can be so difficult to evaluate. The mineral is famous for color zoning, which develops as the chemical environment changes while the crystal grows. In some pieces, those changes are subtle. In others, they create dramatic bands of color that can later become bicolor or even multicolor gemstones. But the cutter has to decide how much of that story to preserve. A long crystal may contain several usable sections, each with different color and clarity. Cutting it into separate stones may produce better individual gems. Keeping the crystal together may preserve a spectacular transition between colors, but it can also mean accepting inclusions or sacrificing symmetry. And then there is the problem of darkness. Some tourmaline rough absorbs so much light along certain directions that a crystal can appear almost black even when the material itself is green, blue, or red. A cutter has to understand how the crystal transmits light before deciding which direction should face upward in the finished stone. That choice can make the difference between a gem that looks vivid and one that looks lifeless. Tourmaline also reminds us that valuable rough does not always arrive as a perfect collector crystal. Broken fragments can still contain exceptional color. A damaged termination can hide clean material deeper inside, and a rough piece with almost no beauty on the surface can produce a gemstone far more dramatic than its original form suggests. That is what makes tourmaline worth a second look. The first color you see may not be the best one. The first surface may not reveal the cleanest section, and sometimes the real surprise is not that the crystal contains a gemstone. It is that one rough crystal can contain several different possibilities at once. Number 2, Boulder opal, the flash of color hidden in ironstone. At first glance, Boulder opal can look like one of the least promising stones on this entire list. A rough piece may be mostly brown ironstone, heavy, uneven, cracked, and completely lacking the transparent crystal shape people usually associate with gemstones. If it is dry and dusty, there may be almost nothing to suggest that anything remarkable is inside. Then the stone moves. For a fraction of a second, a narrow seam flashes blue. Turn it again, and the blue becomes green. Another angle reveals orange, perhaps even red. Then the color disappears back into the brown rock. That brief flash is the reason the stone deserves a second look. Boulder opal forms when precious opal fills thin seams, fractures, and cavities inside iron-rich host rock. Unlike a large transparent crystal that can be separated cleanly from its matrix, the valuable opal may exist as an extremely thin layer. In some pieces, removing the surrounding ironstone would destroy the very color a cutter is trying to save. So the host rock is often left attached, and that changes the entire philosophy of cutting. With many gemstones, the cutter begins with a shape in mind. With Boulder opal, the stone often dictates the shape. The cutter follows the color. A ridge may remain because brilliant opal lies just beneath it. An irregular edge may be preserved because grinding it away would remove the strongest flash. What appears to be unnecessary brown rock can actually support an opal layer so thin that only careful cutting can keep it intact. The most difficult question is depth. A spectacular streak visible on the surface may continue deeper into the stone, or it may vanish after less than a millimeter. There is no easy way to know without carefully working into the rough. That makes every pass against the grinding wheel a calculated risk. Remove too little, and the best color may remain hidden. Remove too much, and it can disappear forever. And that is what gives Boulder opal its particular tension. You are not simply uncovering a gemstone buried inside rock. You are chasing a layer of color through the rock without knowing exactly where it will lead. Sometimes an ugly piece of ironstone contains only a narrow line of opal. But if that line catches the light in exactly the right way, it can become the most important part of the entire stone. Number 1, diamond, the ordinary-looking rough that can hide a masterpiece. Nothing on this list exposes the difference between a rough stone and a finished gemstone more dramatically than diamond. We are used to seeing diamonds after everything difficult has already happened. They are transparent, precise, brilliant. Every facet seems designed to catch light and send it back in flashes of white and spectral color. But a diamond does not come out of the ground looking like that. In rough form, it can be surprisingly quiet. A natural diamond crystal may appear cloudy, greasy, frosted, grayish, yellowish, or simply strange. Some show recognizable octahedral shapes. Others have been distorted, broken, or partly dissolved by geological processes during their journey toward the surface. Without polish, the familiar sparkle is largely absent, and that creates an extraordinary problem. The person holding the rough is not looking at the diamond everyone else will eventually see. They are looking at the possibility of one. Inside that irregular crystal may be a beautiful finished gem, but reaching it means making decisions that cannot be reversed. A fracture may penetrate farther than it appears. A dark inclusion can sit exactly where the center of a finished stone would need to be. One section may be beautifully transparent, while another carries internal stress. Even the natural shape of the rough can determine whether it should become one larger diamond or several smaller ones. This is where cutting becomes almost philosophical. Every polished diamond is created by destroying part of the original crystal. Material that took immense geological time to form is deliberately removed, sometimes in large amounts, because preserving the most weight is not always the same as revealing the best gem. A cutter must decide what deserves to survive. Too cautious, and the finished stone may retain inclusions or poor proportions. Too aggressive, and precious material disappears forever. So before the first major cut, the rough is studied from every possible direction. Modern scanners can help map internal features, but technology does not eliminate the central question. What is the best version of this stone that can exist? That question is why diamond belongs at number 1. Because the greatest thing hidden inside rough diamond is not simply brilliance, it is potential. A dull crystal that seems almost lifeless can eventually become one of the brightest objects a human being can hold. But only after someone looks at what nature created, sees something that is not yet visible, and has the judgment to know exactly what must be removed before the hidden gemstone can finally appear. That is the strange truth behind every great rough stone. The finished gem shows us beauty. The rough shows us how difficult that beauty was to recognize. The strange thing about rough gemstones is that the most important clue is often the easiest one to miss. A flash at the edge, a strange crystal shape, a color that appears only when the light hits from the right direction. And once you know what to look for, an ordinary stone stops being ordinary. So here is the question. Which one of these 10 would you have picked up for a second look? Tell me in the comments. And if you want to see more stones that look almost worthless before revealing what they really are, watch the next video on screen. Because sometimes the greatest discoveries begin with the rock everyone else ignored.